listeners, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Animation Podcast. I'm Alex Sargent.
And I'm Chris Holiday.
Today, Chris, we are joined by someone very special indeed. We're joined by Ian Comley, who is the visual effects supervisor on a little thing called ABBA Voyage. Now,
a little thing called ABBA Voyage.
I say that because I don't know if US listeners are as familiar with it, perhaps,
sure.
or our various international listeners. We do have them. Hello around the world. But if you're in London, you cannot escape ABBA Voyage because ABBA Voyage is on every single tube advert. They'll see it about 4 times when I go home after recording this, I imagine. So, what is ABBA Voyage? Chris, why don't you introduce it?
It is, I saw this relatively recently. It's ostensibly a virtual concert. Some people refer to it as a kind of hologram. It's not quite a hologram. It's essentially it's not projected in the same way. It's more like, and I have a feeling we might talk about this. It's essentially a very convincing animation that sort of, I think, comes in a tradition of live holography, but isn't quite sort of in terms of the technique isn't kind of quite the same. It's this sort of nostalgic / futuristic audiovisual spectacle of ABBA as if they were giving a concert in 2024, which is when I saw it, but they're kind of coded replicated in their identity as how they would look in the, I guess, 70s, 80s, that kind of time. So yeah, a photorealistic, live, quote unquote live, spectacular of ABBA,
Lots of questions for me about imagination, about fantasy, about the magic of a live concert experience, and just the kind of the basic conundrum of how do you make a show where ABBA clearly aren't that age look and feel like a concert experiance.
Exactly.
And for you, lots of geeky questions I suspect about software that I'm going to glaze over at some point. Ian, as I say, a renowned visual effects supervisor in his own right. He's worked at Industrial Light and Magic, ILM, for a variety of different projects. Now, he first started on Star Wars Force Awakens, one of his first gigs, but he's worked on other projects including Guardians of the Galaxy, Paddington, Gravity, and very recently he was nominated both for a BAFTA and an Oscar for his work on Gareth Edwards' The Creator. So, Ian, first of all, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. We're really grateful for your time today.
No problem.
So let's start at the beginning, shall we? How and when did ABBA Voyage sort of land on your desk, as it will, as a project to potentially work on, given your kind of eclectic CV so far? It can't have necessarily been the job you necessarily knew was coming next. It never is, right? But what happened, and when did it become aware this might be a thing you might be working on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, prior to ABBA, my career trajectory in visual effects had very much been film-centric, or film and sort of drifting into the TV as well. So to suddenly go from Star Wars, which is the film I'd worked on prior, to ABBA was a little bit of a head spin for sure. So what was really interesting was ABBA had been contemplating the idea of a virtual concert for some time. You know, it had been 40 years since they had performed together, and they were keen to do something. They wanted it to be fresh, to be contemporary. So this isn't some sort of retro vintage version of what did ABBA look like back in the day. This is meant to be taken as what is an ABBA concert in 2022? Amidst contemporaries, Beyonce's, Taylor Swift's, and the glitz, the glam, the light show. So they very much had that in mind. They didn't really know how to achieve it, but they knew that they themselves did not want to appear on stage in said concert. Partly they are in their 70s, and they'd more than done their stint in the limelight, and were ready to sort of enjoy the process, but not necessarily have to expel the energy every night. So through various routes and conversations, the idea of a virtual concert came to the fore. They had initial explorations. Up front, they were interested in doing a small kind of promo piece, one track with a promo, and they went on a little journey there. Now that actually happened just prior to ILM's involvement. But off the back of that, and it was a challenging exercise to realise that promo, and fundamentally they decided that actually that wasn't the best outlet for this.
And was that promo piece like a piece of video, or was that a live experience, or an immersive kind of like this, or?
So it was a new music track with a video that went alongside, and the video would feature digital ABBA.
Okay.
So they went on that journey, but fundamentally decided that wasn't going to be the best or final outlet for this. I mean, it was meant to be a sort of an entry step, and actually it was better just to get to the meat of the exercise. So it came to ILM. We had some initial surprising conversations. So it was Ben Morris, our creative director for ILM, who worked on the show. Received a call whilst he was actually on his holidays, and it was, hey, we're with ABBA. We'd love for you to get involved and put on this show. So very quickly that became meetings in-house. So we had Benny and Bjorn arrive at our offices on Theobald's Road, coming for initial chat alongside Svana Giesler, one of the producers on the show, Ludwig Andersson, who is Benny from ABBA's son, one of the producers, and Bailey Walsh, who was brought on slightly later on, but as director. And we talked about what could this show be. No one at that stage knew how we would be conceiving and putting this thing together. It was very much a set list and some sort of scratch visuals. But in terms of actually realizing digital ABBAs, and is it Pepper's Ghost? Is it projection on a gauze? Is it, all of this stuff was entirely up for grabs, and was thrilling and fascinating for us to be involved in, right at the beginnings of that conversation. So on one hand, we had the creative brief unfolding, each song trying to come up with a visual identity for it. Okay. And in tandem, certainly Ben and I, and by extension, we had Stu Fish, who are architects and other various partners, lighting design partners, theatrical design architects, numerous people involved in or with experience in sort of theatre and concert space, but certainly, never before having done any sort of digital virtual concerts, creating this brain trust together. Right. So we would get together, we'd pore over what the visual brief per song could be, and at the same time, the brain trusts were also working out, well, perhaps we need a LED wall over here on a robotic arm, perhaps we need some other mechanism for displaying. How can we put this together? We talked to numerous third parties who were exploring three-dimensional screen products and sort of investigating the space. I mean, quite often things are labeled with a hologram or holographic, and in many instances, it's a technique for producing sort of pseudo three-dimensional imagery, but it's not sort of true holograms. But we went on the vast journey there.
Okay, so just to jump in there, because I'm the Luddite on the podcast, I just want to make sure I'm not quite keeping up on some of this. So before we get into LED screens and all this fun stuff, so we've got two companies involved. We've got the kind of the ABBA's already partnered with someone else, as you say, and then they've come to you. What were they looking for ILM to bring to that partnership then? If they had a kind of basic idea, they want to do some sort of visual, digital, contemporary concert experience, new ABBA in the 21st century, whatever. Yeah. The kind of, as you said, what are they asking ILM to bring to this? Are they like just make it happen, or is it slightly more
just do that?
Yeah.
I think they've certainly caught on to the magic in industrial light and
Okay,
magic.
sure. Yeah.
It was very much
like magic.
That's it. Partners who could collaborate.
Yeah.
Ultimately, to work out how on earth to make this thing happen. Sure. Now, clearly, they came to us. They knew our Industrial Light and Magic and part of Lucasfilm, and our history through Star Wars and a multitude of film projects over the decades. So they knew we had the experience and the talent to put together large scale digital products, of course, in a film world. But they realised that this was brand new, and to be honest, that's one of the reasons why we absolutely chomped at the bit to make it happen.
Because I would have, I'm aware Chris is chomping at the bit to ask lots of technical questions, but just so I can conceptualize this, I can imagine, as you said, your experience is all in camera. This is your world. Magic as it happens in a lens. I mean, whether a real lens or a computer lens or whatever, it's a very different and probably quite daunting prospect, I can imagine, to go, how do we do this in real life when that's the kind of brief you're being given, right? You have to make these things that rely on the camera interface be in a room with people, right? So, I mean, other than how do we do that? I'm picturing that scene in Apollo 13 where we have to get these cables in this box using just these clippers, and you've got 10 minutes to think of the answer. Go. Was it a bit like that, or? I
think we certainly had moments. I mean, end to end. So from the first conversations with ABBA and Aniara, the production team, through to launch day was about 3.5 years. Okay. It was a sizable project by any visual effects standards, and not just in terms of time frame. And I don't think there was a moment through that where we ever truly stopped learning and working out the solutions to all these things. As you say, it's not through a camera lens, and so much of our pipeline and our workflow and some of the mechanisms that we can use to take the heat off a shot. Well, let's slightly over-egg the lens flare here, or whatever it might be, sort of stressing the optics to just gently ease off the shot, were not available to us, or at least in terms of the presentation of the real life portion of the show. And I say that because sort of flanking the real life ABBAs and the light show around them, we also have the close-up imagery, which is presented as shot through a camera lens.
Yeah, I didn't think of that. Oh yeah, I've got loads of questions. Keep going. Keep going.
So for the central portion, it's typically the center where we have the life-size representation and this, sort of lighting spectacle, all virtual around them. It was totally a voyage of how can we create believable depth, perspective, how can we play the values and the subtle diffusions through to the human eye as the viewing tool, not an Alexa film sensor, you know. And we also had to take into account it wasn't just our work had to be firmly embedded into happens to be custom built arena, but seamless, borderless, and playing nicely with the physical haze in the auditorium and the light show around as well. So it all had to be complementary. So if, let's say, something like even haze in our volumetric effects in the lighting around ABBA, now we could make a beautiful looking haze, and we did, in terms of these epic simulations that last 6 minutes because a song is 6 minutes and you can't stop and start a short simulation. It fills a vast volume and it runs and runs, and we can dial that in and we can make it look beautiful. But at the same time, once that is seen through a layer of physical haze, you don't want the doubling up effect. It can actually flatten it out and look too much and too lifted and milky. And the last thing we want is to reveal our boundaries, our seams that we've taken such care to hide. So yeah, absolute, ABBA voyage of discovery the whole way to come up with how to control these things, to back off our haze so it works and interplays nicely with the arena smoke, and all the values, and similarly the physical lighting designers working with us to ensure that no beams ever sort of go towards our virtual content, that it's seamless, it looks as though it's all interplaying, but at the same time it's not crossing, and therefore there's sufficient control in both realms to sort of do what you have to do without sort of revealing the trick.
So I mean, I've got lots of, as I'm interested in digital de-aging, I'm interested in holograms and deep fakes and all that kind of stuff, the kind of spectacle of digital bodies. I'm also a huge ABBA fan, and So this is like the perfect kind of Venn diagram of kind of my interest. And I've taught Hollywood musicals, and I've always taught ABBA, Mamma Mia. And what's interesting about this is that you have the first Mamma Mia film, you have the second Mamma Mia film in about 2018, and it feels like, you know, this has been bubbling for a while. ABBA is the band that everybody wants. They want something to happen. They want more ABBA. They want another film of, you know, ABBA's kind of got this. I think the phrase, what is it, much anticipated, is probably an understatement with regards to ABBA Voyage. But I'm actually interested in the thing you said right at the beginning with regards to that pull between sort of, this is, what would an ABBA concert look like today? And obviously a lot of the you know, this is a concert that's attracted a lot of, even in the last 2 or 3 years, kind of, you know, academic articles have been written. People that write on visual effects have written on these kind of abbatars. They've engaged with this idea of kind of holograms and the reimagining of the Pepper's Ghost principle, magic, spectral sort of imagery, all that sort of stuff. So people are really interested in this, and a lot of the stuff around ABBA is the nostalgia. You're getting to see them as they were in their, whatever, 70s heyday, or whatever it's 70s, 80s heyday. You're seeing them as they were then. Am I right in thinking it's also original record? Is it original recordings? They didn't re-record anything new in terms of the audio? I can't remember. I read it in the program on the day, but I can't quite remember.
There are some original tracks.
Yep.
During the concert, and it's all contemporary mixes, but there are some stems that are, you know.
And of course, I suppose when they're interacting with the audience as well, or maybe I don't know. There's a
yes.
There's sort of with the, and people in writing on visual effects have always talked about this sort of wanting to know, but also not wanting to know, and do you know what? It's okay if I don't know. Like that's part of the kind of magic of the whole thing. But I'm interested in a lot of the rhetoric around ABBA is that this is a nostalgic piece of kind of theatre, piece of drama, piece of kind of musical spectacle, but it's also hyper modern. And obviously part of the pre-release material is you have the original ABBA performers in the kind of motion capture suits. The whole show, well, not whole show, but there are certain numbers, I would say, that where they are sort of wearing the kind of futuristic Tron style costumes. Of course, you see them in their Waterloo, you know, Eurovision sort of, but you also see them in these, and so there is this really interesting tension all the way through between they're wearing all of this kind of modern gear, but they look like how they did then. But for you, this is what would ABBA a concert look like today? Part of that visual identity is this is a modern take, but that modernity has to also coexist with this sort of de-aging as well. And there's so I find that tension really interesting because it is those two things can't possibly sit together, but it works, you know, amazingly well. So
that's it. And I mean, it's no accident. I mean, we did so many rounds, including with real ABBA themselves.
Yep.
I mean, you know, the challenge is that everybody, whether you're a diehard ABBA fan or not, you've sort of got an impression of who ABBA are and you know what they sound like, and certainly what they look like. And annoyingly or challengingly for us, you know, everyone's interpretation or sort of residual memory is slightly different. So you can't really target one. You have to sort of target an essence of Agneta or Frida or you know, who is this person to enough of the audience that it's believable likeness. So honing in on certainly a period was really fundamental. So we
what was the
well, it's 1979. Selves is what we were targeting.
Okay.
And there are a few key videos released around that time, which is great reference. You know, good TV interviews and the like.
So that's really interesting because a lot of the stuff around de-aging, deep fakes, they have their target window, or they have we are going to take Jeff Bridges from 1983, and that's going to be our reference for the second Tron, or we are going to, and I think with deep fakes artists in particular, it's any audiovisual material that you've got that you can that will give you that essence. So interviews that they did. So you're looking at all kinds of different source material, trying to gather in all this stuff, because turns out ABBA were quite popular.
Well, that's it. There's a lot available, but you know, there's a whole range of qualities out there. I mean, we're talking sort of early 70s through to very early 80s, and then, you know, their time in the limelight as ABBA finished. So the material available to us is largely television reels. It's 35mm stills. It's kind of 8mm or 16mm film, and occasionally, if you hit the jackpot, the sort of 35mm film, ABBA the movie.
I was just going to say,
tour and some other things as well.
At 79.
But so it was honing in on on the age, on a sort of core look.
Yep.
But that said, they cycled, Frida especially. I mean, she's quite an incredible person in terms of how forward-leaning she was visually in her style, her clothes, her outfits. And I think there's actually a fact where they were able to, if it was deemed a costume, they were able to write it off in tax or something.
Right.
So I think the more flamboyant it was, the more they could put it on their tax calculation.
Sure.
But anyway, I mean, she quite incredible. They all were visually distinct for sure, but certainly Frida went through multiple looks in a very short time frame.
Yes,
so it's not like when you say 1979, oh well, that's Frida, and she was like that 2 years before, 2 years after. She wasn't. She changed maybe 5 times within 1979. So the age and that sort of core, well, the age and the kind of core facial base was really key. But on top of that, then we had to build everything else out. So there's hair. Well, all right, as I've mentioned, Frida went through multiple looks. They all went through multiple looks. But we tried to hone in on something that was both retro, that played to wider audiences, sort of residuals, impressions of ABBA. Like it's very definitively them. Agnieszka with the long blonde hair, and Frida a sort of stylized bob of rather kind of bright red hair. But at the same time, we wanted to make it a contemporary take. We worked with a Swedish hairstylist who had a range of hair models who came into the studio, and he was cutting ABBA's hair, virtual ABBA's hair, as it were. So he, on real human stand-ins, to try and come up with a look that Aniara, the production company, that ABBA themselves bought into as being a modern take on their classic styles.
So kind of that I find really interesting, because a lot of these, holograms, these sort of live performances have been done before, but in my mind, a lot of them are people with very distinct looks that are quite fixed. So Amy Winehouse, rumors of this Amy Winehouse sort of live, but I'm thinking of the kind of 2-pack at Coachella and these various sort of Michael Jackson, I think, at one of the MTV Music Awards. But there's a lot of sort of, it's sort of that stars change appearance, and in the case of ABBA, change with such regularity that actually trying to hone in on a particular as you said, essence. I think this kind of quintessential, and it reminded me of like Bowie. I imagine the difficulty with doing a live like Bowie concert would be a similar sort of thing, because he kind of morphs and changes his appearance, and there are distinct phases, and yet someone like Freddie Mercury remained relatively consistent in his look, certainly in the 1980s. But I'd not really thought about the way that stars changing their appearance puts pressure on a group of artists that are trying to tap into a quintessential ABBA-ness that is going to be, and has to smooth over their fractures. Well, they never looked like that when they performed "Hole in My Soul," and they never looked like those sorts of fans are going to have a lot to say. Have a big stake in the way that these things are received, and you've managed to kind of smooth over all these possible, I guess, fractures between different time periods to create this sort of celebration of a particular period of time that pulls in all of these different songs and a particular look, as to key into a particular look, which I find,
and how the hair frames the face is so key as well. So, after exploring multiple physical hairstyles on real people, we can then start applying them to our digital ABBAs with this kind of base facial likeness. But very quickly, if the framing on the face was off, it blew the likeness immediately. So it was interesting how that also developed to ensure that we were getting enough read on the eyes and just gently sort of enhancing, supporting the cheekbones. I mean, likeness was such a continual theme and challenge all the way through to the bitter end. And something that is worth coming back to is, I mean, you mentioned kind of deepfake AI techniques.
Yeah.
Now, ABBA Voyage is fundamentally a photorealistic feature animation.
Yep.
So we...
damn right it is. I would agree. Yeah, it is.
Just for what does that mean for listeners who are like, what does that mean?
Well, that's it.
Tell Alex.
And there aren't so many of them around. I mean, there are incredible feature animations. So long form animation. So many. But to actually push it to photorealistic levels isn't often done.
Nope.
Mainly due to the complexity, the expense, the additional time constraints, and people for the right creative reasons wanting to lean into a style. But for us, it was all about believability. It was photoreal, and to try and realize characters or people who were known to the general public, and especially their fans, and many of the attendees at the concert. It had to be absolutely on point. So we to create this photorealistic feature animation, we absolutely leveraged capture techniques, so motion capture, facial capture. We have additional markers on fingers. We're trying to get guitar chords. We're trying to get a whole range of data through as the base performance. But then, even with the strength of data from real ABBA themselves and energetic performances, there's still a lot of work to do to actually get it concert ready. It needs to be ABBA presented on their best day. It's like their hair needs to be believable, but it's like their best hair day. It's like their performance and their energy needs to be believable, but it needs to be, the show. It's Freddie Mercury at Live Aid or whatever. It's like,
the perfect show.
That's it. Yeah. Not too perfect to sort of detract, but perfect so you feel like you have seen the event.
Yes.
So that base and the huge numbers, hundreds of artists working together to not only create these digital assets, to get the likeness cooked into all the facial shapes, sculpted facial shapes, full bodies. I mean, we had so much ref that we were pouring over sort of every finger length and deltoid, and just scanning the bodies, pouring with details, trying to get that into the base asset. So by the time we're hitting render, and some whopping, very expensive renders, but we are producing something that is real, believable, etc. So coming back to the deep fake sort of aspect. Now that was not necessarily it wasn't a given as we set off. Kind of deep fake had existed, examples at the beginning, and we as ILM, are keen to keep abreast of anything latest, greatest, cutting edge technology and be at the forefront of. And we have numerous cases of machine learning AI technology in our pipeline supporting our artists. But for ABBA Voyage, we could not assume that any machine learning techniques would play a part in the show, because at that early stage, 3.5 years before May 2022, when it went live, it wasn't necessarily viable.
No.
Certainly on a giant 20K presentation.
Yeah, sure.
So we had a very sort of active. We needed all the plates and to keep them spinning. We all the options needed to be available to us. But in essence, the digital characters are very traditional in terms of its sculpted face shapes based on facial action coding set, and leveraging our facial capture techniques. We have Anima, and we developed a tool with Disney Research called Caracast let me wind back. Anima is a tool developed by Disney Research, who we partner with a lot, so very much in tandem with us, for reconstructing facial performance. So based on either head-mounted camera data, or in fact like a booth of cameras, multiple cameras, we can construct a very faithful representation of the face. Now, if we need to take that solved performance and retarget it across to a young ABBA from 1979, there are multiple ways to do that, but we leveraged another new bit of research in a tool called Caracast, which is also a collaboration between Disney Research and ILM, and that was able to bring that performance across.
Well, actually, you have one, when you say base asset, because I'm really struck by these, you're right, you've got these big screens and you've got these different performances, because I hadn't really thought about the central performance in the middle screen and then all these close-ups that aren't really close-ups at all because there's no camera. So you're not closing up. They are separate animations, or at least they've got to match up with the kind of main quote unquote main performance. But I'd not thought when I watched it. I just sort of assumed they were close-ups of the. Anyway, that's for when you say base asset. So you have one. Is there one ABBA, or there are 50 ABBAs, or because that I'm sort of, you have your main ABBA and then you work with those and tweak it, or you kind of copy paste, and how does that sort of side of things work? Because you mentioned base asset,
so a base asset, that's really for each of the 4 ABBAs. We had like the base would have been, there is a Bjorn, a sculpted Bjorn, who is the right proportions for 1979 Bjorn, with a full complement of facial shapes, but ready to absorb multitude of costumes and slight variations and some hair tweaks. So it's sort of the asset on which we can apply all our variants.
That's it. Yeah, that's really interesting. That sort of duplication, or you have this central Bjorn upon which, and I like the way, the kind of the absorbing of these different tweaks. Alex, go for it.
Well, and then just so I make sure I'm keeping up. And then the assets are, I'm not going to ask you too much about how, because let's leave some magic for the people, but they are somehow then magically, let's use that word, placed so it looks like the asset is standing on the stage there in the arena. In ways we won't necessarily go into. I'm going to ask us, because I'm a bloody academic, I can't help but go back to terms and look at them. You've used photorealism and believability quite a lot in your answers so far, and I think photorealism I like because it's got a caveat, but I find like realism and believability, when I'm teaching students, I kind of like ban them from using those 2 words, particularly when they're talking about their experience of other people's art often, because often it's like, oh, it's just so believable, is that? And then you're like, what does that mean? Because I understand what you mean here, but I'm interested in how it affects your creative process, because essentially it's not believability, is it? Well, it is. I understand what you're saying. It's about that sense of, oh my god, it really looks like they're there. But you are dealing with a context whereby
this is what I mean about you know they're.
Yes, there's an animation theorist who we all love citing, Sergei Eisenstein, like 1930s Russian avant-garde, and he talks about Disney things, and he's like, I know very well, but and that kind of tension between knowing and seeing, and that kind of, actually that's the joy of it. So. And actually what you're saying is some of it you don't want it to be too believable. You don't want them to feel like they've actually was that just them? My father, by the way, believes that there are 4 performers up there on the stage. We'll let him.
Similarly, spoiler alert, but the very, very end, when sort of the right age, the age appropriate ABBAs come on, I was like, hang on, they're there. Oh no. So well done, well done you.
To try and distill this into an actual question is, you're also seem to be self-conscious that you're creating a kind of a fantasy of an ABBA concert that no one could ever actually see, because their catalogue extends beyond the 1979 point. They're wearing these digital costumes occasionally to like gesture towards it. How much are you aware that like you're also giving them kind of slightly more than reality when you're designing these things?
I think there is a we can.
Or should I let my students use the word believability?
Yeah. Well, I think there are points in the show where we can lean more towards the hyperreal. You've called out the kind of futuristic outfits and things. Like we can enjoy the fact that this is contemporary and we can, we have the control to do whatever we want.
Exactly.
Up on those performances.
And why wouldn't you?
That's it. Early conversations at least touched on the idea of, well, can we take that further? I mean, should we see deliberate kind of glitches or stylizations that go sort of well beyond what could be achieved in real life? But I suppose the believable, at least for me, is so the audience stop worrying about what they're seeing and how they're seeing it, and just enjoy the energy and the emotion and have a good time with the music. It's like, at that point, it's believable enough that you can buy into it. You can breathe easy after the first song. ABBA up on stage and things get going. Yep. That's it. You can just sort of. Yep. I don't really mind. It doesn't matter what I'm seeing because this is fun.
Yeah.
And at that stage, I think we've probably done our job.
Yeah, but it's funny. It's funny though, because you're right that these are feature length. They're photoreal feature length animations. And it's funny that that first decade of the 2000s begins and ends with motion capture. And it's like the decade. It's the decade of motion capture. It's you start with Gollum, you end with Avatar, and in between you've got Robert Zemeckis, who I think partnered with Disney as part of Image Movers Digital to kind of create these motion cap, the equivalents, the rare films that you're suggesting, the rare examples of feature length photoreal animation. Of course, the Toy Stories are kind of photoreal in some ways, but they extend and play with hyperrealism, of course, in other ways. But you have Christmas Carol, Beowulf, Polar Express. These are and Final Fantasy, where people are a little bit unsure. You've got that uncanniness. But that kind of photoreal feature length animation, it seems to work better in this concert, in this kind of segmented concert format, because exactly that really odd spectatorial position that you've just described of, if we've done our job, people will get through the first song and be like, oh, okay, I'm not worrying about it or thinking about it. I think with a lot of feature length animated films like Beowulf, that process never happens. You're always going, this is just. And ultimately, those kinds of movies I don't think are made anymore. Mars Needs Mums in 2011 is the film that kind of finished put the footnote at the end of.
I have heard you mention Mars Meets Mums more than I think anyone
exactly,
else.
But it's like the film where it's like people prefer a Toy Story or a film that's playing a little bit with aesthetics rather than something that's photo. So I wonder if there's something about the concert format that seems to lend itself. Like we get through that spectatorial thing quicker. I think the song ends, you go, right, I'm into it now. It seems like the technology works better for a concert than a film. Is basically what I'm saying.
Which is mad because before you start this journey, surely the pedant in the room goes, well, that won't work, will it? Because people aren't going to queue up to watch a live an animation.
We will.
Are they?
We will.
Theoretically crossing hands, but obviously people are, and I actually live very near Stratford. They do it every Saturday. I see them all dressed up, ready to come. So. Yeah, I don't know. I
think what it is it goes back to your point about you're having to work because ABBA are so famous and this is such a big thing, and because they it's like 40 Towers, they stopped before the end sort of thing. They stopped when it was still really good and they left people wanting more, and you get that with ABBA. You get their relationships playing out through the songs, the breakups. They stay together a little bit, and there's some really awkward songs where they're sort of singing to their ex-partner. But ABBA is such this big kind of thing. But everybody, as you say, it's not just everyone has they might have their favourite song, but they also have their favourite member or their favourite era or their favourite set of costumes. So you're trying to anticipate, you're second-guessing a lot of different information to create, again, going back to this idea of essence. So there's that extra bit to this. It's not just the illusion of a live performance. You're playing to a kind of a cultural, historical imaginary of what ABBA is.
It's about the most daunting
task, I bet.
And embarking on it, as I mentioned, not knowing how or if we could. I mean, that's, it's what we enjoy and what we do. As a company, we run at the challenges, not necessarily knowing our path to success. as we go. But yeah, I mean, it is super daunting. So they've got to be, they've got to be, well, I'll use the word believable. But they've got to be realistic. They've got to be, some of, if not the best digital human representations we've ever done. And on top of that, it's not just creating a digital human that no one's ever seen or met before, and you can sort of get away with something if it's human. And they also have to be ABBA.
Sure.
And play to this kind of residual impression of what everyone expects ABBA to look like. So this succession. So many artists poured, endless hours of crafted detail and observation into trying to get, to try and get our assets and the whole setup as detailed and plausible as possible. We were able, towards the end of the process, able to leverage some modicum of sort of facial likeness enhancement using, all the techniques at our disposal. But yeah, I think for me, it's so important to call it out from other uses of, let's say, deep fake AI, which is typically applied to something that you have photographed. So in many ways, you've done hard work to get that photography, but at the same time, the process is relatively kind of straightforward. Whereas to get to the point of having an image to enhance, we've had to build digital assets with hundreds of artists over thousands of hours. The whole endeavor there. So. Yeah, a bit of a different beast.
Yeah, I've still got loads of questions.
This isn't just so listeners. This isn't Photoshop, or to use a really clear. It's not where you've built Woody. You've built a animated character. It just happened to look exactly like a 1979 version of thing. That amount of labour and toil has gone into every single step of it, rather than this kind of. Yeah, the deep fake. It creates this kind of register. Just click the de-aging button, and easy. That's
it. I mean, super powerful tool that's come a long way since we started. But that is is different to ABBA Voyage.
Yeah.
Did you think about the liveness of the context at all? I guess is what I was trying to think my way through my previous comments, because the stuff you've worked on before. The other thing, obviously. Film is a live performance in many ways, but it's not quite the same as of these things needing to work in a concert venue. So that must have been an interesting thing to think through, and how you make images like this work as live performers.
100%. Maybe an example of that is, so as well as working with the architects and actually sound designers along the way, and theatrical lighting designers, we also have the AV specialists, so the folks who are driving the various display devices around the auditorium to bring the illusion to life. And we need to ensure that there is clearly like a timeline that everyone is working on. There is fundamentally like a time code base for the show, just as there would be on any London or global theatre project. But it needs to have the same breaks and backups and everything as a live show. So if you're watching Phantom of the Opera and the conductor flings their baton over their shoulder and has to go and pick it up, you need to vamp a little bit. You need to keep things moving. We need those same kind of break points and loop points and things in the show. So we had to also plan that out. And what are we looping in that scenario?
So why do you need those?
He asked rhetorically.
He asks because this is just an animation, isn't it? He asks rhetorically.
Well, it's ABBA are digital, of course, but they're still an 11-piece band of live session musicians where anything can happen along the way.
Yep.
There are so many. The ceiling is packed with lighting fixtures and automations to make the show, the setup for each song come to life, and that can glitch and stall and have its own characteristics in all sorts of weird and wonderful ways. So it is very much a living, breathing show with all the same gotchas that can afflict any London production. It just so happens that the 4 stars happen to be digital. So you absolutely need those breakpoints, and they have certainly been leveraged during the run of the show to now to make it successful.
So you have backup. Do you have like live? So backup live things. So something goes wrong.
Well,
because I know that there are obviously bits in the show where, they're all, I think they all at some point interact with the audience and they talk about it's great to be here, and they kind of make these kind of really strange, but they still work, these kind of anachronistic gags about time and so forth. So there's that. There's obviously the band that are performing live and they kind of appear at various at the point of the beginning. So are you saying that they're like bonus animations? This might not be true, but I just like the idea that if the lighting goes down or whatever, something happens, that you've got like a backup. Or maybe you can't say that, but I'd love. I'm not going to put you on the spot.
Yeah, that's it. I don't think we can unpick all the layers, but well, maybe let's put ABBA themselves to one side.
Yeah,
sure.
There's also what happens.
What happens if the conductor drops his baton?
There's that, but there's what happens between the portions where ABBA are on stage.
Yeah.
So quite often they come on, they perform a song, it pretty much sort of transitions straight into the next one.
Yep.
But eventually you have these break points where ABBA recede into the darkness of the stage for costume changes.
Yeah.
As with a live show.
Yeah.
And in those moments, there might be something else happening, be it the live band playing a skit or an animated piece, or we sort of have sort of pop video-like elements as well. But we also have what we term a dark stage. So our mechanisms for displaying the concert never switch off. They are always live, even when ABBA are not there, and even when a light show is not, or sort of a lighting spectacle is not taking place. There is always a presence of a stage, and that virtual stage has depth, perspective, everything else.
Yep.
So that is just as much a part of our thought process and our rendering and everything else as everything else. That dark stage is something that we can vamp and loop on. So that is a natural place to break. So if you finish one song, the lighting spectacle kind of winds down, ABBA can recede for a costume change, and then we have this empty stage moment. Well, that empty stage is the prime opportunity to go and pick up the baton, or do whatever else needs to be done.
Yeah.
I mean, this sort of dark stage was very much part of the thought process and the exploration with the AV specialist to ensure that we had these breakpoints and these opportunities. I mean, the dark stage itself, so we're keeping this virtual stage configuration alive. That's got its own trusses and lighting fixtures and components to give structure and depth and believability there. And early on, we had a lovely moment where we started switching on all our different layers, and no ABBA, purely empty virtual stage, but we had all these physical lighting designers in the auditorium going, is that your light? You've left your LEDs on. It's like, no, that's your one, mate. You've left the LEDs on. And of course, they're looking at our virtual digital lighting fixtures where we've consciously added an extra little LED pinger or displays, and we want to create some interest in these virtual lighting fixtures. But they're so believable that the staff were absolutely bought into the fact that this was there and present, and someone should bloody well get up the ladder and turn that light around, because we're not paid to reveal LEDs to the audience.
Yeah.
We end up with all these very unusual conversations that are so far from the world of film. To achieve something like this, it's a very different endeavor.
What about making that's how you kind of mitigate against the liveness, but what about making a virtue of it? Is there any way of, because I don't know, we're always learning on this podcast, speaking to people like yourself, but from what I understand about the process of making an animation, it is perhaps the least live experience I've ever heard of in my entire life. It's not very linear. It's very, back and forth. We repeat, we look over and things like that. It doesn't seem, so what is there anything you can do other than kind of mitigate these things or add little things like Chris is talking about, like when they talk to the crowd and things like that, to kind of create that sense of this is happening. This is a performance that isn't exactly the same as, I guess that's what people are looking for, right, with a live experience, the sense that this is my performance rather than I happen to have seen the 2:00 screening of Star Wars, right?
It's no, absolutely. And I mean, ABBA themselves are, and I say ABBA as a group, I mean, in particular Bjorn, who's very tech savvy and involved in some amazing sort of enterprises there, is really goading us to come up with mechanisms to keep the interactive, or to enhance the interaction.
So you have thought about this. It's embedded into the.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? That liveness is the kind of the way that, because it's a nominal. Well, it is a live performance insofar as I saw it live when I was there. As my mum used to say about Stars in Their Eyes, are they singing live? Well, it was live when they sung it, but I'm watching it.
So live animation.
Yeah, and that tension I find really productive for thinking about this new sort of wave, or the way that we might think about that unusual spectatorial position that we're put in, that it seems like is replicated from the kind of artist side, where you're thinking about liveness as a device. I mean, I suppose coming out of that, I have lots of questions, but do they? My glib question is: do they get sweatier as the show goes on? So that's my glib question. And my second question is: has the show? And I don't know. Maybe you can. Has the show changed since it sort of first? Thinking about time and duration, they are giving a performance, and you think that they go through costume changes, so they probably get a bit sweaty and a little bit kind of raggedy. But I can't quite remember if that is fed into the designs. But also, is the show that I saw over in April, is that the show that people would have seen in 2020, or have from the artist side, have you been kind of refining bits as you've kind of gone along? Or at least thought about refining it. Or
you can just answer the first one.
Yeah. I'll answer the sweaty bit.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, we absolutely had those conversations. It's
because that's an impression of liveness, isn't it? That this is labour that they're expending here, and
no, totally. So they're sweaty sheen and just trying to allow that to be a real thing. But I mean, similar to the hairs, you sort of want it to be. You want it to be real and natural, and hair can tangle and get stuck in weird knots behind as you're doing an energetic dance. But at the same time, you also want to present sort of the best day, where they didn't get too sweaty, and where the hair sort of stayed in its more real and interactive, and some strands getting caught on shoulders and things, and some nice break up and flyaways, etc. But not snagged and knotty.
She's kind of coming out all frazzled because of the. So you're kind of building in almost the equivalent of your lens flare. So you're building in your lens flare where you've got your mistake. A mistake in live action is now considered a virtue in animation, because it's giving you that it was in front of a camera. The equivalent is when you're making something like ABBA Voyage, you're trying to think about what are some of the potential, not errors, but what are the things that we could, a bit of sweat or a bit of a tangled thing or catching on a costume. So you're thinking about those things even if you're not implementing them.
We're certainly thinking about them, and we are implementing them,
right.
But also we're looking for opportunities just to gently and imperceptibly kind of reset and tame it back to style. And the good hair day or the less sweaty moment.
I like that idea that this is the best this is the best concert. So it's like the kind of to get our Bond film reference in for this episode. That thing about Bond where it's happening 6 months into the future, right? It's kind of fantastic, but it's not fantastic enough to notice, right? So it's like it's the best concert they ever did, rather than it being like a typical concert.
I think we're going to say the best Bond film was always the next one, because you're waiting for.
Oh, that's true too.
You're waiting for the next. Yes. No, I guess when I was asking about the kind of change, I suppose there's the tech side, because I guess these things, in the same way you have films that you don't have the chance to do this with cinema, at least with an ongoing live show, there are opportunities to refine things as you go. In the same way, films are, remastered after so long. So I guess at the very least, the concert format gives you the chance to do some kind of tweaks beyond, I suppose the things that artists do, where they're like, well, that song didn't work. From what I understand, that you can't just change the song, because that's a whole nother set of animations. But no, I think the idea of the concert format, that the photorealist format doesn't seem to lend itself very well to cinema, because it seems to lend itself better to the way the spectatorial position that you adopt when you go to see this performance in some kind of strange way. Yeah.
I guess I get, because I'm aware we're short of time.
Yes.
As a final question, and you can, as I say, be as generalised or as specific as you want in your answer, but we always like to ask people like yourself, sort of, for a moment, a very specific moment, if you can think of in the show.
Oh yeah, that was going to be my one.
It, without giving any spoilers, of course, that means a lot to you because of the baggage with it. Was there a bit where the hair flip that took 3 months to fix, or was there a
maybe it's just your favourite song?
The second chorus of Waterloo was a right nightmare, or something. Anything that you feel you're able to reveal that showcases the labour and the craft behind all of this.
Yeah. I've mentioned the huge number of artists, and in fact, multiple of our global sites. So we
could you just give us a sheer number for listeners who have no idea about this process. What are we talking?
Probably at peak, we could have easily been around 500 globally.
Wow.
And
working
that was
full time.
Yeah, and hubbed in London with artists at different locations working on sections, but the assets and the kind of conception of the show and how we would achieve all the seamless blends and workflow, etc., very much kind of originating on the London side. And with it, a project of this scale comes with so many multipliers. It's at higher frame rates than a standard kind of 24 frames a second film project. It's certainly higher resolutions for all our content. It's multi-layered by the time you're considering what is presented as a sort of a video close-up as opposed to a live portion. It multiplies to the point where we, the storage footprint is insane. Way beyond, probably the heaviest shows, or the heaviest perhaps top 2 or even 3 shows that I'll ever have done before. It's so much material because it's so long and so layered at these frame rates and resolutions. And just to render as well, I think it's hopefully not giving too much away, but we estimated over 1 billion proc hours to render ABBA Voyage. So that's the equivalent of one processor running for 1 billion hours.
Wow.
Now, of course, we have many thousands, millions of cores that we can kind of tap into over the duration of the show. But it just plants the insane kind of quantities that you have to get through, and we have to be able to iterate and refine. It doesn't just fall out.
Sure.
So we're rendering the concert many times to get it to this level of refinement. And I've mentioned how challenging and daunting it is to achieve real, I'm avoiding believable now, but real characters.
Use what you want.
With
That's what he does.
With the level of likeness that is required to pull this off. Every artist absolutely putting their best in there. I cannot think of a project. We've got incredible teams, and every film and TV and an immersive show that we do is all about team. But this is, there cannot be a weak link in something like ABBA Voyage, because everyone needs to be electric and on fire, giving their contribution to come together to add up to create this sum that is more than,
Otherwise, it's right back to square one.
It really is. It can, it can deflate very quickly. So the daunting, the challenge, and it certainly led to a lot of effort and stress and time from the team to bring it all together from that point of not knowing how to constructing the pipelines and the tools and the language and the workflows to make it all happen. So it was massive. But coming back to your question, sitting in the auditorium, I think in the we had the big launch day. We had a few public screenings where the audience got bigger and bigger, until eventually we had launch. And at that point, I think it was where Dancing Queen starts up, reasonably towards the end of the concert. For anyone who hasn't seen the show, there's a standing dance floor.
Yep.
And surrounded by banks of raked seating, so you can choose where you want to be. And of course, the dance floor, was alive throughout. And the seating, there were moments and pockets of people who were up on their feet for their best songs in different moments. But when it came to Dancing Queen, there's something about the song, but also about the spectacle and the colours. The show gets deliberately more colourful and bold as it goes along. The whole arena were up on their feet and erupted at that point. So that's some 3,000 people absolutely lost in the moment of this wash of colour and ABBA and energy and joy. And that certainly did it and was enough for me. You can work on a film project and get tremendous pride from your contribution to said project, but at the same time, there are only so many ways where you can experience other people enjoying that endeavour. So you might be in a cinema screen and you get applause or a bit of conversation afterwards, but that is different from 3,000 people up on their feet, many in tears. In a good way. Just having
Thanks for clarifying.
I was just in tears at the animation. This is
yeah. But his hair, it wasn't the best hair.
No, he didn't have a beard in that one.
Wow, I'll bet.
So that, it's immensely challenging, but immensely satisfying, and also, could not be more proud of the project and especially the team of people involved in putting it all together.
That's also the other challenge, I suppose, because the songs are so well known. You've got to improve or enhance or support a song that's already top tier. So you're like, this song deserves exactly that experience and that kind of aesthetic
and watching
spectacle,
thousands of people,
and then watching
that you've
actually pulled it off.
That's amazing.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to end the chat, because you've been very generous with your time.
Yes.
Thanks Ian so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to talk through. We don't want to give away too much of the magic. People should go see it for themselves if they haven't already. Their tickets definitely are still available, because I see them on the tube advertising all the time. So please get down there. Thanks so much, Ian, for joining us on the podcast.
Cool. Sure.
And you can use that same handle, FANANIM research @gmail.com, to email us with suggestions of future footnote episodes. If some of the techno jargon in this bamboozled you a little bit, email us and we'll do our best to explain it in 10 minutes.
We will.
In our in-between episodes. Is there anything? There's nothing on ABBA, I suspect, on our back catalogue. There's a blog, but there might be some stuff on.
Stuff on performance, stuff on sort of digital, holograms. I've written a blog that begins actually with a little bit on the Walt Disney hologram that was recently at one of the Disney 100 celebrations of the studio. So you'll find some holograms under our keywords for sure.
Great. So that's fantasy-animation.org for that. Subscribe to the podcast if you're not already. Leave us a review if you haven't already. A lovely, nice, kind review, or a stingy one if you must. But the first one would be preferable, so do that. If you're thinking about doing the other one, actually just don't, would probably be my advice.
Pop it in an email.
How you support the pod. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.
Bye.